Welcome to another episode of Divorce Tips. Today we are talking about what is an emergency order and why would I need one. This is kind of a good topic because when we say emergency and we look at the scope of things, a lot of times in divorce, custody, modifications, there really are only a few things that would categorize as an emergency. So if you think it's an emergency, you probably want to talk to your attorney. You want to find out, hey, this is an emergency, but let's talk a little bit about it. An emergency would most likely be if there's been an act of domestic violence, a major act of physical abuse, and, something that would cause you to be harmed in any way. And those would, require the court to then file an emergency order. Now, I'm going to specifically speak for Utah because that's where I'm licensed and I know the best, and I can't speak for every state. But in Utah, there are only two emergency orders that could happen. One is a protective order. A protective order is a quasi-criminal filing that if any form of domestic violence has happened and or something has happened that has caused you to be in fear of your safety, a protective order could be warranted. A protective order is a filing where you have to then show that you have to meet a few elements. First of all, you have to be a cohabitant of that party or you have to be dating that party. So you can't get a protective order just against, some random person on the street. It has to be that you've either been living together, you've been married, you've been cohabitating, and or you've been dating each other. You also then have to show either one of those two elements, that there's been domestic violence. Now, domestic violence in the statute in Utah goes a lot of ways: stalking, harassment, electronic harassment. There's a lot of things that could happen that would go under domestic violence versus just physical abuse. Also, if you can show that they've done something that would cause for your fear and safety, then that would obviously be like, say they posted something on Facebook that was absolutely terrifying, threatening you of your life, that would be warranted then for an emergency protective order. And those are signed emergently. Now, it's kind of interesting that we say that because technically they're only signed, between 9 and 5, Monday through Friday, so long as a judge can look at it. There are not really an emergency protective order that can be filed at night and or over the weekend. Clearly, if something major of abuse has happened, you should be calling the cops. The cops should be filing a police report and hopefully arresting that person for whatever they've done. And that will give you the emergency protection that you need. The second and only other way that you can get emergency order in Utah is called a temporary restraining order. And this is actually under the statute of temporary injunctions. And then you can get an injunction for emergency in Utah if you can meet the same elements as the temporary restraining order for, say, a building's going up on precious water land and you don't want that. That can be considered an emergency and they could file an emergency injunction. And what they have to show in Utah is that there's immediate and irreparable harm. So in Utah, in family law cases specifically, those a temporary restraining order can be filed if you can show that there's immediate and irreparable harm that to whatever the situation is. The problem with that is in Utah, there really isn't a definition of what immediate and what irreparable is. And because of that, it's very, very subjective to whatever the judge thinks. Does the judge think it's immediate? Does the judge think that it's irreparable? I don't know. So it's very fact and subjective to that. And obviously an attorney can tell you whether they believe a temporary restraining order is warranted. I am very confident sometimes in my temporary restraining orders and then they get denied. It's very, very subjective. So those are the only two ways you can get an actual emergency order when you're dealing with divorce and custody and things in Utah. Specifically, I am going to guess that most states have very, very similar. Most states, all states are going to have some kind of protective order to protect you from violence if that's happening. They just might be called something different. So you're going to want to check out your local state, your local county to specifically know what you need to do to get that emergency help. And I'm saying this right now, if you are in an emergency, if something is happening that you believe has raised to where your life is in danger and your safety is at risk, you need to call the cops first and foremost and let them do their job to hopefully immediately protect you, because the courts go at their pace. And sometimes when we say immediate, it's not immediate. And we tell all of our clients that. The other thing is court orders are only pieces of paper. They're not something that's going to retaliate to protect you if somebody is willing to violate that piece of paper. So whatever you do when it comes to this emergency, you need to make sure you're taking steps to protect yourself, to make sure that you're not being able to be found, or that you can get protection from the cops immediately so that you are safe in whatever situation you are going through. Hope that helps, and talk to you next time on Divorce Tips. Thank you for listening to this episode. If you enjoyed, please subscribe, follow, and share. I'd love to hear your questions and feedback. You can contact me at community@jillcoil.com. See you next time. I am an attorney, but I am not your attorney. Any advice given on the podcast is general and shall not be construed as legal advice.